I stepped out of the cab, the Texas sun already heavy, when I saw them. My bags scattered on the porch, a note taped to the door. Mom, don't come back. Still, I didn't move, my hand frozen on the handle of my suitcase. As the words echoed in my mind, a cold pit opened in my stomach. While my fingers traced the edge of the note, I heard my phone buzz in my pocket, an unfamiliar number. The same voice I never thought I'd hear again. Mrs. Monroe, we need to talk. It's about your son. We're about to begin, but if you like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Caroline's heel clicked on the sidewalk, sharp and unnervingly loud. She stepped out of the cab, feeling the heat of the Texas sun press against her skin, even as a chill crawled up her spine. The house, a familiar sight for years, loomed ahead, the white shutters reflecting the midday light. She squinted as the sun flashed off the driveway. Her suitcases were scattered across the front porch like discarded remnants of her past life, their handles twisted and crumpled. A single piece of paper, taped to the door with the kind of care one might use for a fragile artifact, fluttered in the breeze. Caroline's pulse quickened as she reached for it, her hands trembling ever so slightly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ryan's. She read the words slowly, each syllable falling like a hammer on her chest. Mom, don't come back. The note was cold, clinical. Her own son. A part of her wanted to laugh, to believe it was some sick joke. But her stomach twisted, and her eyes flicked to the door handle. Her fingers, numb and unfeeling, fumbled with the key as she tried to turn it in the lock. It refused to budge. She turned it again, harder this time, but the key slid uselessly in the lock. Her chest tightened, panic rising in her throat. She pulled back, staring at the key in her hand as if it had betrayed her. A sound came from inside, muffled laughter, followed by a high-pitched voice she recognized instantly. Tina. Her breath caught in her throat. Caroline's legs felt weak as she stood there. Alone. Her house no longer welcoming. She knocked once, then again, harder, her knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. Moments passed. The door cracked open just a few inches. Ryan stood there, his face a mask of faux surprise. His eyes flitted briefly to her suitcases on the porch, then to her face. You weren't supposed to come back early, he said, his voice strangely calm as if they hadn't just shattered everything. Caroline's heart pounded in her ears, but she kept her voice steady. It's my house. Ryan's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked to something behind him, Tina, who was no doubt watching from the shadows. Then he sighed, a sound so hollow that it made Caroline's skin prickle. Not anymore, he said, his voice a mix of pity and entitlement. It's ours now. She froze, the words reverberating through her body, sinking deep into her bones. Ours? She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was stand there, a stranger on her own doorstep. Tina appeared beside Ryan then, her face a calculated mask of indifference. Carolyn could see the smugness in her eyes, the sense of victory. The woman had always been a snake, but now she was wearing the skin of someone who had won. You can't do this, Caroline said, her voice cracking as she fought to steady herself. Her hands were trembling, her mind racing. How could they be doing this? How could they take everything? Ryan's smile was thin, almost cruel, as he shrugged and stepped back. We already did. Caroline stood there, staring at him, at the home that no longer felt like home. She could feel the weight of the moment settling over her, thick and suffocating. The reality was settling in. They had betrayed her. Tina leaned against the doorframe, her lips curled into a sickly smile. Mom, she said, as if she were speaking to a child, please respect our boundaries. Caroline's chest tightened, and for a moment she wasn't sure whether she wanted to laugh or cry. Boundaries? She had spent a lifetime building this house, raising them, loving them, and now she was nothing more than an unwanted guest. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. I'll leave, Caroline said quietly, finally finding her voice again. But this isn't over. Ryan's expression shifted just a fraction, his eyes narrowing. He opened the door wider as if he were offering her some twisted form of courtesy. He didn't believe her. He thought he had won. But Caroline knew something he didn't. As she turned to walk away, she caught the faintest sound, barely audible over the roaring in her head. The sound of laughter, a low, mocking chuckle from Tina. The key in her pocket burned against her skin. Not yet. Caroline thought again. She would play their game, but not for long. The neon sign flickered weakly in the distance, casting a pale green glow over the cracked pavement. Caroline pulled the cab to a stop in front of the budget motel, her mind numb, her thoughts scattered. She stared at the building, feeling a wave of disorientation wash over her. It was nothing like the home she had built, the sanctuary she had carved out from years of loss, love, and labor. Her fingers shook as she reached into her purse, retrieving the crumpled note once more. "Mom, don't come back." Her breath caught in her throat. She had read it 100 times since she left the porch, each time hoping the words might change. But they hadn't. They never would. She walked to the motel office, the sound of her heels tapping rhythmically on the concrete. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and the faint scent of bleach, too overpowering to mask the underlying rot. She handed over her credit card to the bored receptionist, who didn't even look up from the computer. The door to the room clicked open, and she stepped inside, feeling as though she were stepping into some dark, alternate reality. The dim light buzzed overhead. The furniture was worn, cheap, and uninspiring. The bed had an odd indentation in the middle, as if someone had spent far too much time lying in it. The walls, bare and colorless, seemed to close in on her as she tossed her suitcase on the floor. The note was still clutched tightly in her hand. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it, rereading the words over and over. "Mom, don't come back." Each time she read it, the betrayal sank deeper, like a rock dropping into her chest. This wasn't just eviction. This was exile. This was them telling her she no longer belonged, that her presence was no longer wanted or needed. Her own son. The words became heavier, suffocating her. She dialed Ryan's number, her thumb hovering over the screen for a moment, as if she might change her mind. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe if she heard his voice, she'd understand. The call rang, and rang, and rang, before it finally went to voicemail. Her thumb hovered over the button to leave a message, but nothing came out. What could she say? That she didn't deserve this? That after everything she'd done for him, for them, she was now an outsider? The voicemail beeped, and she ended the call. Her phone buzzed, the vibration harsh against the stillness of the room. A message from Tina. Caroline glanced at it, her heart sinking as she read the words. "Please respect our boundaries." Caroline let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and hollow. Boundaries? Or theft? She whispered the words to herself, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Boundaries were something you set when you cared, when you valued a relationship. This was a declaration of war, not respect. They were taking everything from her, and they wanted her to quietly accept it. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. Caroline stared at it for a moment, a strange instinctive tension tightening in her chest. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice a little shakier than she intended. "This is Caroline Monroe," she said. Mrs. Monroe, a woman's voice replied, sharp and no nonsense. This is Attorney Ross. I need you to meet me immediately. There's something you need to see. The words hung in the air for a moment, but Caroline didn't move. She wasn't sure whether it was the unexpected urgency or the voice itself, but her heart started to race. She swallowed, trying to steady her breath. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. I'm your attorney, a friend of your late husband's. I know what's happened, and it's time we talked about it. You need to come to my office. Right now. Her mind buzzed with questions, but one thing stood out more than anything. They knew. They knew what had been done, and someone on the inside, was ready to help her fight back. I'll be there, she said, her voice firmer now, as she stood up and grabbed her purse. The door to the room felt as if it were closing behind her with the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. As she stepped out into the hallway, her heart pounded louder. They thought they could take everything from her, she thought. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. The evening air outside was still and oppressive, the Texas heat hanging in the air like a blanket. But Caroline didn't notice. She wasn't hot. She wasn't cold. She was something else now. Something that didn't care about the betrayals that had pushed her to this point, or the future that lay before her. She was done being the victim. And someone in that office, was going to help her make sure of it. Her phone buzzed again, but this time she didn't need to look. She already knew what it was. The game had just begun. The office was colder than the Texas heat outside, the air conditioning humming quietly in the background, trying to fill the silence. Caroline sat in a leather chair, the cushion too stiff and formal for the moment. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She had been pacing when she walked in, but now, as the seconds passed, she felt her energy draining. She was on edge, not sure if it was the soft hum of the air conditioner or the buzz of her nerves. Ellie Ross's office smelled like old books, leather, and the sharp scent of strong coffee. There were no windows, no clocks, just shelves lined with volumes of legal texts and a desk cluttered with papers. Papers Caroline would have once seen as lifeblood, but now they felt like an endless maze of red tape, cutting her off from everything she had known. Everything she had worked for. Mrs. Monroe, Ellie's voice broke through her thoughts. The older woman stood behind her desk, poised, almost military in her precision, with eyes that never missed a thing. She wasn't young, but there was a hard, razor-sharp edge to her that made Caroline feel both uneasy and grateful. Ellie slid a file across the desk, and Caroline's heart stopped as she recognized the familiar handwriting, Ryan's. Someone filed new documents, Caroline, Ellie said, leaning back in her chair, watching Caroline's reaction closely. Naming Ryan as a co-owner of your husband's estate. Caroline blinked, as though she hadn't quite heard her right. Her throat felt tight, her pulse roaring in her ears. She stared at the documents, but they seemed to blur, the words on the page retreating like shadows. What do you mean? Co-owner? She asked, her voice trembling. Ellie's expression hardened. Without your consent. Without your knowledge. Forged documents. Sloppy work. But dangerous. Caroline's stomach twisted. The betrayal. The lie. The deliberate cruelty. It was all piling up so fast she couldn't catch her breath. How could they? Her thoughts were swirling. No anchor, no clarity. She wanted to scream, to fight. But there was no space. No room to breathe. They threw me out of my own house for it, Caroline muttered, the words tumbling out, sharp with raw disbelief. For these forged papers. Ellie's gaze never wavered. Then we won't fight fair either. The bluntness of her words stung. Caroline had been so focused on trying to understand what had happened, trying to make sense of the injustice, that she hadn't realized. She hadn't understood that the rules they'd been playing by no longer applied. The walls Ryan and Tina had built around her weren't just metaphorical. They were real, and they were suffocating. Caroline's chest tightened, her eyes flicking to the door, to the world beyond the sterile office. She wiped away a tear, just one, and then another, steadying herself. It was a brief moment of weakness, and she hated it. But then, as quickly as the tears came, they were gone. The anger surged in its place, sharp and electric. Her body stiffened, every muscle coiled. "Then let's make them regret building walls," Caroline said, her voice quiet but with a weight to it. A resolve she hadn't felt since before all of this started. Ellie watched her for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, finally, she smiled, a small, approving curve of her lips. "You've got it, Caroline. But it's not going to be easy. We'll have to move fast, and we'll have to be ruthless. There's no more room for kindness now." Caroline nodded, her mind already racing through the possibilities, through the sharp corners of revenge that could be carved from the depths of this betrayal. The coldness of it was like ice in her veins, but she couldn't feel it anymore. She didn't care. "I don't care what it takes," Caroline said, her words steady and fierce. "They will pay for this. I'll make them pay." Ellie slid another folder across the desk, this one thicker, its contents more complex. "We'll begin with the fraudulent documents. There are holes, big ones. But that's only the beginning. We need to gather evidence, build a case strong enough to shake their foundations. And we'll need time." Caroline's hand shook only briefly as she reached for the file, but when her fingers touched the cold, hard paper, it was like the first step in a new war. Her war. The door to the office creaked open, and Caroline's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected anyone else, but when she turned, the familiar face of Mark Ross, the retired judge and Ellie's husband, stepped inside, a quiet presence with the authority of years spent on the bench. Mark's eyes flicked between Caroline and Ellie. He gave her a slight nod, as if to say, "This is it. You're not alone now." "We have a few options," Mark said quietly, his voice measured as though every word he spoke had the weight of years behind it. "But the clock's ticking. Ryan's already begun making moves to liquidate assets. We can't let him beat us to it." Caroline's jaw clenched. The final piece had fallen into place, and she felt the cold, unrelenting determination settle in her chest. "They won't get away with it," Caroline said, her voice low and final. And in that moment, she meant it. She wasn't just going to fight for her house. She wasn't just going to fight for what was rightfully hers. She was going to burn everything they thought they owned, and she would watch it all burn to the ground. The sun had long set by the time Caroline and Ellie sat in the cramped, windowless office of Ellie's law firm, their faces lit by the glow of a single desk lamp. The late-night hum of the city outside was muted by the thick walls, leaving the room heavy with the weight of their pursuit. Piles of papers, legal documents, and case files were strewn across the desk like discarded remnants of a life being torn apart. Ellie flipped through the files with practiced efficiency, her hands moving quickly over pages, eyes sharp and calculating. Caroline sat across from her, her fingers tapping restlessly on the table. She was learning to breathe again, but it was hard. The anger still churned beneath the surface, a quiet rage that she didn't know how to handle. They had to act fast, and she could feel time slipping away. "They're trying to hide it," Ellie muttered, her brow furrowing as she scanned a new set of documents. A series of transfers. Small, incremental, buried deep in the paperwork. Ryan's been moving assets around, trying to make it look like everything was his. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the page. "They think they can get away with this." Her voice was tight, but steady. They're wrong. Ellie didn't answer at first, just flipped to the next document. Caroline's heart skipped a beat as Ellie's eyes narrowed, scanning the digital signature of one of the property transfer forms. There, Ellie said, pointing to the screen. A digital signature. This one was forged. Look at the date. He filed this a week before you even returned from your trip. Caroline's breath hitched. The words felt like a slap in the face. Forgery. It wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was criminal. That's all of it, isn't it? Caroline whispered, barely able to process the depths of their deception. Not yet, Ellie replied, voice calm but full of steely determination. There's more. Something much worse. Caroline sat back, her mind reeling. Her son had forged documents, stolen her property, and yet it wasn't the money that stung the most. It was the manipulation, the betrayal wrapped in the guise of family. Ryan had twisted the grief of losing his father into a weapon, using it to take control of everything that was supposed to be hers. Ellie clicked open another file, a letter. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read it, and then she looked up at Caroline. Here, she said, sliding the letter across the desk. This is the proof we need. Ryan filed for power of attorney, claiming you were mentally unfit to handle your own affairs. Caroline's blood ran cold. The words on the page blurred for a moment. Mentally unfit. She had always thought of her grief as something she could control, something she could hide beneath the surface, but Ryan had seen it as an opportunity. He had taken the one thing that had already made her vulnerable, her mourning, and used it against her. He used grief as a weapon, Caroline said, her voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the words sinking into her chest. He, her own son, had turned her weakness into a crime. Ellie didn't flinch. And now it's our turn to use proof as ours, she said, her voice low and firm. The law won't just be your shield, Caroline. It'll be your sword. Caroline's eyes burned with the memory of Ryan's voice, the smug indifference he'd shown when he had thrown her out of her own home. How easily they had wiped their hands of her, like she didn't matter. But she did matter. She had the truth, and now she had the tools to fight back. Her heart raced as she stood, suddenly feeling a new kind of urgency. I need to go, she said, her voice a little breathless. I have something they didn't expect. Ellie raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She simply nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. Caroline left the office and drove through the quiet streets of Austin, the headlights from passing cars illuminating the darkness. It was as though the city was waiting with her, as though the night held its breath while she prepared for what came next. The drive felt too long. Each minute that ticked by felt like a year. Her mind raced as she thought about the vault, about the ledgers and the papers her late husband had kept for years, the key he had entrusted to her, to protect their family, to protect her. She had never imagined she would need it like this. She reached the bank just as it was about to close, and the guard at the door recognized her immediately. He led her to the vault where she retrieved the folder, thick with the weight of years of history, her history, their history. She didn't open it right away, but her fingers lingered on the edges, her breath shaky as she thought about the man she had loved and lost. Back in her car, she opened the folder, her heart racing. The ledgers were there, just as she had remembered, but it was the letter on top that caught her eye. She unfolded it slowly, feeling the weight of her late husband's words settle on her shoulders. If they ever turn on you, the letter read, everything is in Trust B. Caroline's eyes widened as she read the words again. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the world seemed to stop as the realization hit her. She looked up, staring at the road ahead of her, a fierce smile tugging at the corner of her lips. They think they own the house, Caroline whispered, her voice thick with newfound resolve. But they don't. She shoved the letter back into the folder, feeling the cold weight of the trust documents now, its promise burning through her veins. This was what she needed, what she had been waiting for. The game was no longer about what Ryan and Tina had taken from her. It was about what they had never seen coming. And Caroline was about to take it all back. The next morning, Caroline sat in Ellie's office, the familiar smell of leather-bound books filling the space. But it no longer comforted her. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. The thick folder, now containing the trust documents, sat between them on the desk. Caroline's fingers traced the edge of the folder, her thoughts racing as she replayed the conversation from the night before. Trust B. It wasn't just an ordinary trust, it was the key to everything. The one thing Ryan and Tina hadn't counted on, the one thing they could never have anticipated. Ellie slid the papers out, her eyes scanning the details. "Everything is in Trust B, Caroline," she said, her voice steady, but there was an edge of excitement. "It contains ownership of 3 properties, including the family business. You're still the controlling trustee. Ryan has no legal claim." Caroline's breath caught in her chest. The family business. The Monroe legacy. Something Ryan had always coveted, something that had always been out of his reach. Caroline could feel the weight of it now, the immense power of what she held in her hands. She had the leverage, she had control, and she knew what she had to do. The thought of Ryan's smirk, the way he'd looked at her when he threw her out, stung like a fresh wound. They think they own everything, she thought bitterly, but they don't. The realization was like a flame lighting the darkest part of her heart. Ellie's voice broke through her thoughts. "If we play this right, they'll evict themselves," she said, her voice low and calculating. "They'll never see it coming." Caroline paused, her fingers tightening around the edge of the folder. Her lips curled into a smile, but it was cold. A smile that came from a place of calculated revenge. "Not yet," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I want to see how far they'll go." Ellie raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she nodded. They weren't just going to win, they were going to make Ryan and Tina destroy themselves in the process. Caroline stood, slipping the folder back into her bag, her movements sharp and purposeful. She wasn't just thinking about getting her house back anymore. She was thinking about how to take back everything, everything they thought they could claim. But first, she needed to see the reality of their greed, to watch it unfold. She wanted to see it all for herself. As she left the office, the weight of her decision felt heavy on her chest. Her car was parked on the side of the street, the engine running softly, waiting for her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. She hadn't yet told Ellie everything about the for sale sign, but she didn't need to. Caroline knew what she was doing. She drove through the streets of Austin, the city around her fading into the background. Each passing block felt like another mile in her journey. She knew where she was headed. The house. Her house. When she turned onto the familiar street, it hit her, the sight of the for sale sign stuck in the front yard like a knife to her chest. A lump formed in her throat, but she swallowed it back. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the power she held, the power she was taking back. Caroline slowed her car as she approached the driveway. Through the window, she could see Ryan and Tina, standing side by side with a realtor. They were laughing, relaxed, completely unaware of the storm they were about to face. Caroline's hand moved instinctively to the camera on her phone, her thumb swiping across the screen. She zoomed in on them, on Ryan, laughing like nothing had ever happened, and Tina, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. Click. The picture felt cold, sharp. It was evidence, a symbol of everything they had tried to take from her. She wasn't just going to take it back. She was going to make sure they paid for every moment of it. Caroline sat there for a moment longer, the camera still in her hand, her eyes fixed on the scene in front of her. The house, her house, was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. But this time, she wasn't the one on the losing end. She started the car, pulling away from the curb, but the scene stayed with her. Ryan and Tina, oblivious to the storm brewing on the horizon, stood there with their realtor, planning their victory. But Caroline knew better. They had no idea what was coming. She didn't need to move fast anymore. She had the patience of someone who had already lost everything and gained so much more in the process. As she drove away, she smiled to herself. The fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like the one in control, and she couldn't wait to watch them unravel. The afternoon light filtered through the windshield as Caroline drove down the familiar streets of Austin, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The city felt like a stranger now, its bustling energy a sharp contrast to the quiet, suffocating feeling that had settled in her chest. But there was a plan, a strategy she had perfected in the silence of her own thoughts. A way to make them believe she was still the person they thought she was. She was done with anger. Now it was time to play the game. Their game. She parked in a quiet spot a few blocks from her house and stared at the phone in her lap, the screen glowing in the dim light. Her fingers hovered over the call button, but she hesitated. This wasn't about truth anymore. It wasn't about justice. It was about precision, about playing her part in this sick little dance of deceit. Naivety, she thought with a bitter smile, is a weapon too. Taking a deep breath, Caroline dialed Ryan's number. Her heart drummed in her chest as the phone rang, each tone stretching out in her mind like an eternity. She had to sound like the woman they thought they had evicted, confused, vulnerable, broken. Ryan answered on the third ring, his voice too bright, almost forced. "Hey, Mom, you okay?" Caroline's chest tightened, but she forced herself to soften her voice. She could hear the tiredness in his tone, the satisfaction of someone who thought they had won. But she wasn't playing by the same rules. "Ryan, I don't understand. What's happening? Why am I being told I have to leave? I thought this was my home." Ryan sighed, but there was no pity in his voice, only that familiar, calculated calm. "Mom, it's better this way. You're not alone. We'll take care of things. We've got everything under control." Everything under control. They think they have everything under control. Caroline felt the sting of his words, but she swallowed it down. "Of course," she said, her voice soft but filled with an unsettling calm. "I trust you." There was a beat of silence before Ryan spoke again, his voice a little less guarded now. "Good. I know this is hard, but we're just doing what's best for you. For all of us." Caroline closed her eyes, the bitter taste of his words lingering on her tongue. This was it. The false reassurance, the kindness that came with a price. They were taking everything. And now they were pretending they weren't. A part of her wanted to lash out, to scream into the phone, to demand justice. But Caroline knew better. If they wanted to think she was weak, she'd let them. Let them believe they had broken her. "Thanks, Ryan," Caroline said, her voice steady, giving nothing away. "I'm glad you're here for me." "I'll call you later, okay?" he replied. There was a note of finality in his voice, like he thought the conversation was over, like he thought she was over. "Of course," Caroline whispered, then ended the call. For a moment she just sat there in the car, the screen of the phone dark in her hand. She wanted to slam it against the dashboard, to scream until her throat burned. But she wouldn't. That wasn't the plan. She glanced at the rearview mirror and saw nothing but the quiet street behind her. Ryan was already moving ahead, thinking he had her on the ropes. But she was the one in control now. The game had only just begun. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the screen flashed with a text from Tina. Caroline's finger hovered over the message. Please respect our boundaries. The words were familiar, tired, cold, and thinly veiled in the guise of politeness. Caroline shook her head, the corners of her mouth curving upward into a bitter smile. Boundaries? Or a prison? She couldn't help but laugh under her breath. But then, another thought struck her. A small, quiet moment of clarity. She was playing her part, pretending weakness. But the truth was, she hadn't even begun to fight. She needed to gather the pieces, to let them slip further into their delusions. She needed to let Ryan and Tina think they had it all figured out, right up until the moment they realized they were wrong. Caroline exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her chest. It was time to make them feel like they were winning. That's when her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Ryan. It was a familiar number, one that made her skin prickle with anticipation. Ellie. Caroline. Ellie's voice was low but urgent. We need to talk. It's happening faster than we thought. Ryan's already started making moves to sell the house. He's meeting with a realtor tonight. You need to act now. Caroline's heart skipped a beat. They were already selling it? Her eyes flashed with determination. They think they own it. They think they have everything. Caroline took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm on my way. Her eyes glinted with a mixture of calm fury and resolve. As she started the car, a new thought crossed her mind. They're out for good. But what they didn't know was, so were they. The weight of the moment pressed on Caroline's chest as she sat in Ellie's office, the papers between them now a tangible promise of war. Ellie's eyes were steady, unwavering, her focus unbroken as she prepared the court motion. The motion to freeze all Monroe assets. It would stop Ryan and Tina cold. Their careful steps, their lies, would come to an abrupt halt. Caroline watched as Ellie's pen moved across the paper, making sharp, deliberate notes. The motion was simple. Immediate action, the freezing of all funds, properties, and accounts associated with the estate. It was powerful, immediate, and it would leave them nowhere to run. They're going to have no idea what hit them, Ellie muttered, not looking up from the document. Her calm demeanor only made the tension in the room more suffocating. Caroline, however, felt a flicker of something else. The satisfaction of knowing they were about to watch their whole world fall apart. Ellie finished drafting the motion and set the pen down, looking up with a knowing glint in her eyes. We file first thing tomorrow. By Friday, they'll have nowhere to stand. Caroline's fingers twitched. The thought of Ryan and Tina scrambling, their world disintegrating as the truth poured out, filled her with a quiet but intense satisfaction. She swallowed, her voice steady, but carrying a cold edge. Good. I want to see their faces when the rug disappears. Ellie's lips curved into a small, approving smile, and for a brief moment, Caroline thought she could hear the faintest sound of distant victory ringing in the background. It wasn't over yet, but the plan was set. They were going to destroy everything Ryan and Tina had built, piece by piece. But before the storm broke, before everything came crashing down, there was one more thing to do. Caroline left Ellie's office, the motion safely tucked in her bag, but the gnawing sense of preparation still lingered. As she drove through the city, her mind churned. She wasn't just watching a house fall. She wasn't just reclaiming a life. She was making sure that when they lost it all, they would feel it in every bone, in every moment of realization. She arrived at the bank, her heartbeat steady, her mind focused. The manager, an older man who had known her for years, greeted her with a nod. Caroline had always trusted him. After all, he had been there when her late husband had signed everything, when the papers had been finalized, when Trust B had been set in motion. He led her back to his office, a place as familiar as her own home, though now it felt more like a battlefield. She watched as he retrieved the documents from his filing cabinet, the ones that Ryan had used to forge signatures, the ones that would now undo everything they had done. He placed them on the desk in front of her, and Caroline's gaze immediately flicked to the forged signature. It was clean, too clean, the writing too neat to be hers. She hadn't signed anything like this. "That's not your handwriting, is it?" she asked, though she knew the answer. The bank manager leaned forward, his fingers resting lightly on the papers. "No, Miss Monroe, it's not. I was there when you signed the original documents. This is a forgery." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. The words hung in the air like an accusation, one that would bring the whole house of cards down. "Can you confirm that in a statement?" Caroline's voice was calm, but it was sharp with purpose. The manager nodded, taking a pen and writing out a statement confirming the forgery. Caroline recorded it on her phone, the weight of the moment sinking in as the truth was laid bare. Once the statement was finished, she stood, pocketing the phone, feeling a new sense of power welling up inside her. She hadn't just been handed the proof of Ryan's betrayal. She had just sealed his fate. As she left the bank, her mind raced with thoughts of the next steps. The motion was ready. The evidence was there. It was all coming together. But Caroline wasn't just after a legal victory. She wanted to see Ryan's world crumble. She wanted to watch the smug look on Tina's face fade when the truth came to light. She wanted them to see how deeply they had underestimated her. That night, back in her quiet hotel room, Caroline booked a spa weekend. It was time for a moment of peace, the calm before the storm. A few days to let the papers sit, to let Ryan and Tina believe they were winning. After all, they thought they had control. They thought they were ahead. But Caroline knew better. The storm would come, and when it did, it would tear everything they had built apart. The morning air was heavy, thick with the promise of change. Caroline could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a prelude to what was about to unfold. The sun had barely risen over Austin, but already the streets hummed with life. She had no intention of being on the sidelines today. Today was the day she would take back what was hers. From her car, she watched the house she had once called home. It looked different now, almost unrecognizable. The front yard, once lush and green, had been neatly trimmed, and the driveway was littered with a few cars, all belonging to prospective buyers. A for sale sign still stood proudly in the front yard, mocking her. Inside, she knew Tina and Ryan were probably already preparing for the open house. They thought they were about to sell off their prize, to move on to the next chapter of their lives, as though the house, the family legacy, was just a commodity to be bartered with. They had no idea how wrong they were. Caroline steadied her breath, slipping out of the car and straightening her jacket. She wasn't here to beg for her house back. She wasn't here to explain. No. She was here to make them regret everything. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she heard the muffled sounds of conversation from inside, voices too familiar. Tina's sharp laugh echoed through the walls, followed by Ryan's more subdued, but no less condescending tone. The real estate agent was likely somewhere nearby, fawning over whatever riches they were about to sell to the highest bidder. Caroline approached the front door, taking one last deep breath, then pushed it open without knocking. The scene inside was a farce. Tina was standing next to a real estate agent, showing off the grand living room, gesturing as though she were the homeowner herself, casually ignoring the weight of her betrayal. Ryan was there too, standing near the front window, a smug expression plastered across his face. He looked up when he saw Caroline enter, his eyes briefly flickering with something like irritation before he masked it with a tight smile. "Mom," he greeted her, his voice too sweet, too rehearsed. "We weren't expecting you today." Caroline smiled back, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know." she said coolly, her gaze sweeping over the room. But I think it's time we clear a few things up. Tina straightened, her face momentarily slipping into a frown, but she quickly masked it with a haughty glance. Ignore the old lady's name on the deed, she said casually, directing the realtor's attention to Caroline's old office space. It's all handled. Don't worry about her. She's just a relic of the past. The realtor nodded uneasily, but said nothing, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room. His eyes flicked nervously to Caroline and back to the others, unsure how to proceed. He wasn't a part of their family drama, but he knew enough to see that something wasn't right. Caroline took a slow step forward, her presence commanding the room, her posture straight, impeccable, as if she hadn't just been cast aside by the people she had raised. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor as she approached Ryan, who hadn't yet grasped the gravity of the situation. Ryan's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out absently, checking the screen as he casually muttered, "It's probably the bank. Nothing important." But Caroline wasn't watching him anymore. She was focused on the documents she held in her hand, which she unfolded deliberately in front of him. "You might want to tell your guests this isn't your house to sell," she said softly, but the words were heavy with intent. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth carried more weight than any threat ever could. She placed the trust documents on the table, the papers crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the chaos she knew they'd soon bring. Ryan glanced down at the trust papers, confusion flashing across his face before it quickly turned to disbelief. He looked at the document again, then at Tina, who was already stepping back as if to distance herself from the sinking ship. The realtor's eyes darted between them, clearly unsure of what was happening, but feeling the tension rise. "No," Ryan muttered, his voice faltering. "This can't be." Caroline's voice was steady, her tone cold. "You thought you could sell my house, Ryan? You thought you could steal from me? You're not just evicting me, you're evicting yourself." Tina's face twisted into a mask of outrage. "This is my house now. You can't just—" She started, but Caroline cut her off, her gaze unyielding. "Actually?" Caroline interrupted, her eyes never leaving Ryan's stunned face. "I can." Ryan's hand shook slightly as he dropped his phone, the screen lighting up with an alert. "Account frozen." The sudden flashing text felt like a blow to his gut. The legal freeze had hit. Ellie had done her job, and now there was no turning back. Caroline's lips curled into a bitter smile, watching the walls they had built around themselves begin to crumble. Ryan's face drained of color, and Tina took an instinctive step back, both realizing too late that they had miscalculated. They were trapped in a net they had built themselves, and now there was no escape. Caroline didn't say another word. She watched them, every second of their panic a victory in itself. She could feel the satisfaction rising in her chest, but she didn't need to gloat. The facts spoke for themselves. She was done playing their game. Ryan opened his mouth, his voice barely a whisper as he stammered, "This isn't over." Caroline tilted her head slightly, her smile widening, knowing full well that it had only just begun. "It is," she said softly. "It's over for you." The room was thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone inside. The realtor stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the property flyer, unsure whether to continue his pitch or run for cover. Ryan's face had drained of color, and Tina's eyes darted between the trust documents and the empty space in front of her, where the comfortable illusion of control had just shattered. Caroline stood there, unwavering, holding the truth between her hands as if it were the last weapon she'd ever need. She glanced around, noticing the phones subtly raised by a couple of the prospective buyers. They weren't pretending to ignore the scene anymore. They were filming. Tina's voice, high-pitched and shaky, cut through the heavy silence. "You can't do this," she shouted. her composure cracking like fragile glass. Caroline didn't flinch, her posture still impeccable, her voice calm and measured. "You already did," she said quietly, each word hanging in the air like a hammer. Ryan opened his mouth, then shut it, unable to form a coherent thought. The reality of what was happening, the very foundation of his carefully constructed lies crumbling before him, was too much to process. His eyes flicked from the documents on the table to the phones filming everything, his mind spinning as he realized just how badly things had gone off the rails. Tina, on the other hand, had always been the more reactionary one, and now she was unraveling in real time. Her fake composure, so carefully crafted, cracked in front of everyone. Her lip trembled, and she stepped forward, her voice dripping with venom. "You ruined this family," she spat, her words sharp, but they were empty, desperate. Caroline's expression didn't waver. She was done being the victim, the one thrown out and trampled underfoot. The years of being dismissed, ignored, and belittled were gone. "No," Caroline replied softly. "You did, the moment you left me on the porch." Her words struck harder than any blow could. Tina flinched, her eyes flickering with a mix of guilt and fury. But Caroline wasn't done. She had spent enough time swallowing her rage, letting them think they had won. She wasn't playing by their rules anymore. She was reclaiming everything they had taken from her, and then some. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. One of the buyers, still filming, glanced at another and muttered something Caroline couldn't quite hear. But it didn't matter. She knew what was coming. The video was already live. Phones were already buzzing with messages, and the buyer who had captured the entire confrontation sent the clip to his social media accounts. Within minutes, the video was out of their hands, circulating like wildfire. Caroline could see the growing shock in Ryan's eyes as he realized the irreversible damage unfolding around him. Tina, her face now pale, caught sight of the comments appearing on the screen. Words like, "Mother evicted, then reclaims home," flashed across the video. The realtor shifted uncomfortably, stepping away from the growing chaos. He had no stake in this fight, and it was clear he was starting to wonder whether he should have just stayed out of it altogether. Ryan finally took a step forward, his voice cracking. "This isn't right," he said, the words hollow, the fight draining out of him. "You can't just... This is my house now." Caroline didn't even look at him as she spoke. Her focus was on the screen of her phone, where she saw the first tweet starting to pick up traction. It was all unraveling. She could feel the blood pumping through her veins, a rush of victory that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge until now. "It was never your house," she said, her tone laced with ice. "You just thought you could take it. You thought you could take everything. But it's not yours to sell, Ryan. Not anymore." Tina opened her mouth to argue, but Caroline wasn't listening. The public had already made up their mind. The video was already out there. Their betrayal had already been exposed. And now, they would have to face the consequences of their greed, their lies, and their arrogance. As Caroline turned to leave, she heard the quiet buzz of phones in the room. The video was gaining traction. News outlets were already picking it up. A quiet storm was growing, and it was all about to come crashing down. But Caroline wasn't looking back. She had done what she set out to do. She had exposed them for who they truly were. And now, the world would see what she had known all along. They thought they could take everything from her. But now, everyone would know that Caroline Monroe wasn't the woman they could walk all over anymore. And she wasn't done yet. As she stepped out of the house, her phone vibrated again. A text message popped up from Ellie. "It's spreading faster than we thought. The video's going viral. By tonight, they'll be finished." Caroline smiled, a dark, satisfied smile. The storm had just begun, and she would enjoy watching them drown in it. "Not yet," she whispered under her breath. "Not yet." The world outside was relentless. and Caroline watched as it spun faster, the chaos of the last few days spilling into every corner of her life. It had been a week since the video went viral, and the ripple effects of Ryan and Tina's betrayal had only just begun to hit. The phone calls, the messages, the news alerts, they came in waves, unrelenting and overwhelming. Ryan's office had called, but Caroline hadn't picked up. She knew the news by now anyway. His boss had sent a terse email, informing him that effective immediately, his position at the firm had been terminated. There were no details, no explanations, just a brief message acknowledging the scandal that had now become impossible to ignore. Caroline didn't need to see his face to know how much it stung. He'd worked so hard to maintain that image, that shiny veneer of success, and now it had all crumbled. She set the phone down and glanced over at the TV, where a news anchor was reporting on the ongoing fallout of the Monroe family scandal. It was already breaking headlines: how a mother was evicted from her home, only to reclaim it in the most public way possible. The footage was everywhere. Ryan's face on the verge of breakdown, Tina's fury radiating in every frame. Caroline, calm, poised, and devastatingly collected. It was all over the news, like wildfire. Tina's career had come to an even faster, more brutal halt. Her influencer partnerships had dropped her one by one, each message an unceremonious dismissal. Sponsors had fled, their contracts nullified in the blink of an eye, her carefully crafted social media empire crumbling faster than she could respond to the messages flooding in. The life she'd built on appearances, on controlling how the world saw her, had vanished into thin air. Caroline smiled to herself, her eyes dark with the satisfaction of watching them unravel. But she wasn't done yet. The battle had only just begun. She turned away from the screen, her gaze landing on the set of keys in her hand. It was time. The house. The locks. The place that had once been hers was now firmly back under her control. The police had already been contacted, and they were set to arrive soon to enforce the restraining order she'd placed against Ryan and Tina. No more surprise visits, no more audacious attempts to sneak back in. She stood up, straightening the jacket she hadn't worn in years, and walked toward the door of the house. The house was quiet now, save for the distant hum of the neighborhood outside. She walked into the hallway, stopping at the front door to meet the officer who was waiting outside. His expression was professional, but his eyes held a trace of sympathy. He'd seen this kind of thing before, but the stakes here were different. This wasn't just a divorce. This was personal. Ms. Monroe. The officer greeted her, his voice low, respectful. We're here to make sure everything goes smoothly. Caroline nodded, her grip tight on the keys. Thank you. With a single motion, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of the house greeting her. It still felt like home, but with a new weight, a new purpose. She walked over to the doorframe and quickly changed the locks, securing them in place. It was symbolic, a final action of control after everything they had tried to take from her. Her phone buzzed again. It was a text from Ellie. The restraining order is in place. You're free to make your next move. Caroline didn't reply immediately. She just stood there for a moment, letting the quiet of the house wash over her. It was done. The victory was hers. But her thoughts turned to something else now, to her grandson. She heard a small voice before she saw him. Grandma. Henry's voice trembled as he appeared in the doorway, his small body quivering with emotion. Can I stay with you? I don't want to go back. Caroline's heart broke at the sight of him, her grandson, the one person she would protect with every breath in her body. She opened her arms, and without hesitation, Henry ran into them. She held him tightly, feeling the weight of his trust, the weight of everything she had fought for. Always, Caroline whispered, the words thick in her throat. She kissed the top of his head, feeling a quiet resolve settle in her chest. The house, the family, her legacy. It wasn't just about getting back what had been taken. It was about protecting what mattered most. Henry mattered most. The doorbell rang, cutting through the stillness. Caroline pulled away from Henry, the moment slipping away as reality settled back in. The officers were here to finalize the restraining order. The house was hers again, but so much more had been lost. As the door opened, Ellie stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of pride and understanding. She'd been there every step of the way, watching as Caroline dismantled the carefully constructed empire that Ryan and Tina had built. Caroline looked at her, her expression hardening. "You've won," Ellie said softly, stepping inside. "This is your moment." Caroline's lips curled into a small, bitter smile. She wasn't finished. "Not yet," Caroline replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm just getting started." And as she stood there, her grandson safely nestled in her arms, her enemies on the brink of total collapse, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just reclaiming her life. She was reclaiming her family's future. And no one was going to take that from her. Not ever again. Caroline sat in the quiet of her study, the soft hum of the clock on the wall, the only sound that broke the stillness. She had spent the better part of the day reviewing documents, pages upon pages of financial statements, bank records, and transfer files. The weight of the papers in front of her was almost suffocating, but she kept moving through them with a quiet, methodical focus. She wasn't finished. Not yet. She flipped another page, her fingers pausing when she saw the loan agreement. It was a document she didn't recognize, a loan taken out against her name. Her chest tightened as she scanned the details. $500,000. The loan had been approved and deposited months before her husband's death, and the signature on it, Ryan's, was unmistakable. Her fingers hovered over the page, the ink bleeding together in front of her eyes. He had taken out loans using her name, forging documents, and pretending she had authorized it all. She felt the hot wave of betrayal flood through her once again, stronger this time. Ryan hadn't just tried to take the house, he had tried to take everything. Caroline's breath caught in her throat as the full scope of his actions came into focus. He wasn't just trying to rob her of her home, he was trying to destroy her, financially, emotionally, completely. It was as if nothing she had worked for, nothing she had built with her husband, had ever mattered to him. It was all just a game, and Caroline was no longer playing. The door to the study opened softly, and Ellie stepped inside. She had been with Caroline throughout the worst of this nightmare, but now, it was all coming to a head. Ellie took one look at Caroline's face and knew something had changed. There was no turning back now. "Tell me what you found," Ellie said, her voice steady. She had been here for the last several days, offering support and legal counsel, but Caroline could see the glint of anticipation in her eyes. Ellie had been waiting for this moment too. They both knew it was only a matter of time before the true extent of Ryan's fraud came to light. Caroline looked up at her, the loan agreement still clutched tightly in her hands. "He didn't just take the house," Caroline said, her voice thick with disbelief. "He took loans, against my name, all of it." Ellie's expression hardened. "That's federal now," she said quietly. "We need to involve the authorities. He's crossed a line." Caroline stared at the page, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. Her mind raced. She had already reclaimed her house, made sure Ryan and Tina felt the consequences of their actions. But this was something else. It was bigger than a family dispute or a battle over property. This was theft, fraud, a deliberate, calculated attempt to strip her of everything. "I won't let him get away with it," Caroline said, her voice low but fierce. "Then we go federal. I want him to feel every ounce of this." Ellie nodded, a flicker of approval in her gaze. She knew Caroline better than anyone else, knew what she was capable of when she was backed into a corner. Caroline wasn't just going to let this slide. She was going to tear Ryan's world apart, piece by piece, just like he had done to her. Ellie pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Caroline watched her, her fingers tapping nervously against the desk as she waited. When Ellie hung up, she met Caroline's gaze with the sharp look of a woman who had just set the wheels of justice in motion. "The FBI's on it. They'll investigate the loan, the signatures, everything. It's a matter of time before they take him down." Caroline nodded, but her expression remained hard. She wasn't waiting for justice anymore. Justice would come, but it would be too late to undo the damage Ryan had caused. She wanted him to feel the weight of his own actions. She wanted him to sweat, to panic, to understand the true cost of his greed. The phone rang. Caroline glanced at the screen. It was Ryan. She picked it up on the third ring, her voice cool, devoid of emotion. "Ryan." "Mom." Ryan's voice cracked through the line. "We need to talk." Caroline leaned back in her chair, feeling the rise of satisfaction bubble up in her chest. "Do we?" "I didn't mean for things to go this far," Ryan continued, his voice strained. I thought you'd understand. Please. I know we've had our differences, but we're family." "Family?" Caroline's voice was like ice. "You think what you did was about family?" Ryan hesitated, the silence on the other end growing heavy. "Look, we can work something out. I can't lose everything. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. Just don't go public with this." Caroline smiled to herself, leaning forward with purpose. "You negotiated my love for convenience, Ryan. This is business now. You made it business the moment you decided to take what wasn't yours." Ryan's voice grew more desperate, panic creeping in. "Please, I—" Click. Caroline pressed the button to end the call, her hand steady. The call had been recorded, every word captured, every threat logged. Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You recorded it?" Caroline's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "It's already been forwarded to the authorities. Let's see if he tries to negotiate his way out of this one." Ellie nodded approvingly. "He won't." Caroline stood up, her eyes never leaving the window that looked out over the quiet neighborhood. The storm had arrived, but this time it wasn't just Ryan who would face the consequences. He had built his empire on lies, and now the wreckage would be his alone to carry. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And when the FBI arrived, she would be there, watching every move, every step, as Ryan's empire came crashing down. But she would make sure he knew. She was the one who had taken it all back. And now, she was coming for him. The courtroom was silent. The tension hanging thick in the air. The wooden walls, the gleaming bench, and the cold, oppressive silence of the room made Caroline's heart beat faster. But only because she knew this was the end. It was all coming to a head, and there was no escape now for Ryan and Tina. The trial had dragged on for weeks, but today was the day the verdict would be rendered. Ryan sat stiffly beside his attorney, his face pale and gaunt. The confident, cocky persona he had always worn had evaporated. He was no longer the golden child of the Monroe family. He was a man caught in the jaws of his own making, and the reality of it was settling in. Tina, seated across from him, was silent, her eyes downcast. She hadn't spoken since the first day of the trial, her once sharp and venomous words now absent. She looked like a woman broken, not by the law, but by the undeniable truth. She had never imagined it would come to this. Caroline sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight, her hands resting calmly on the table in front of her. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the utter destruction of her family, had settled into her bones. But it didn't show on her face. She had transformed over the last few months, from a woman cast aside to one who now held the reins of her destiny. Today, she wasn't just reclaiming what was hers. She was ensuring that Ryan and Tina would never be able to hurt her again. Ellie sat beside her, a reassuring presence, her hand gently brushing against Caroline's. They had been through so much together. Ellie had been a steadfast friend, and today, they would both witness the final act of this long, brutal saga. The judge, an older man with glasses perched at the end of his nose, looked at the papers in front of him. His gaze flicked up to the courtroom before he spoke. His voice was firm, with no trace of emotion. After careful review of the evidence presented and the testimonies given, he said, pausing briefly to glance at Ryan and Tina, the court has determined that the power of attorney was falsified. The deeds associated with the property transfers are invalid. The charges of fraud and coercion against the defendants are substantiated. Ryan flinched as the words sank in, but he didn't look at Caroline. He couldn't. His gaze stayed locked to the floor, his hands clasped tightly together in his lap. Caroline couldn't help but notice the faint trembling of his fingers. Once, this man had been her son, the boy she raised, the man she trusted. Now, all that was left was the cold reality of what he had done. "You're guilty," the judge said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Ryan Monroe and Tina Monroe, the court finds you guilty of fraud, coercion, and the illegal manipulation of the Monroe family estate. Your actions have caused irreparable harm. Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks." Ryan's face went ashen. He looked up for the first time, his eyes meeting Caroline's. There were tears in them. Tears he hadn't shed until now. Desperation. Guilt. The man who had once shown no remorse now seemed to realize just how much he had lost. "Mom, please," he choked out, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Please, this isn't you. You're my mother. We can fix this. I'll make it right. Just forgive me." Caroline's heart twisted in her chest, but she didn't show it. She wasn't there to offer forgiveness. She wasn't there to ease his pain. She was here to reclaim what was rightfully hers, and Ryan had to face the consequences of his actions. Her voice was calm, precise, devastating. "You left me outside once, Ryan," she said softly, but the words hit with the force of 1,000 blows. "Now, it's my turn to close the door." The courtroom was deathly quiet as Ryan's shoulders slumped, the weight of her words sinking in. Caroline could see the broken pieces of the man he used to be, scattered at his feet. But it wasn't her job to pick them up. Tina didn't move. She hadn't said a word. Caroline knew that Tina, like Ryan, was now facing a future she could no longer control. Caroline had made sure of that. Ellie squeezed Caroline's hand tightly, her voice low but full of pride. "You've won." Caroline nodded, her gaze still fixed on Ryan, who now seemed smaller than the man he had once been. The victory wasn't sweet. It was necessary. It was the price of reclaiming her dignity, her family's legacy, and her place in the world. But as the gavel came down, sealing the verdict, Caroline knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. Not yet. The courtroom emptied as the trial concluded, but Caroline stayed seated, her eyes still focused on the empty space where Ryan and Tina had been moments before. It wasn't over. The road ahead was still long, but the first step had been taken. She had won this battle. But Caroline wasn't done yet. She had no intention of stopping here. She wasn't just reclaiming her home or her business. She was reclaiming her future. And no one was going to take that from her again. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The courtroom had emptied, the gavel's final strike still reverberating in the air. Caroline felt like she was floating, suspended between the echo of victory and the quiet aftermath. The trial was over, and Ryan and Tina were left to face the consequences of their greed and deceit. But it wasn't the end of her journey. She knew it. The gavel may have sealed their fate, but Caroline still had one final piece to reclaim. Ellie had been by her side through it all, always a steady hand, always a reminder that Caroline wasn't alone. As they stepped into the cool, marble-floored hallway of the courthouse, Ellie handed her an envelope. Thin, almost inconsequential, but Caroline's heart skipped a beat at the sight of it. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. "What's this?" Caroline asked, her voice soft but sharp with anticipation. Ellie smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Your husband left one more clause in his will," she said quietly, her words hanging between them like a whisper of fate. "He didn't just leave the estate to you. He gave you the power to redirect the inheritance." Caroline froze, the weight of the statement pressing into her chest. Redirect the inheritance? Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the envelope, the seal still intact. This wasn't just about reclaiming her home, her family business, her legacy. This was about something deeper, something her late husband had known would come, something Caroline had never expected. "Redirect it?" Caroline repeated, her mind already working, already trying to process what this could mean. To who? Ellie's smile softened, but her eyes were resolute. "Understanding. Anyone you trust. It's yours to decide. Your husband knew you'd face a moment like this, Caroline. He trusted you to make the right call." Caroline felt the floor beneath her feet shift, the gravity of her situation pulling her in different directions. She had already fought for what was hers. She had already taken everything back. What more was there to do? Her gaze dropped to the envelope in her hands, and in that moment, something clicked. Henry, her grandson. The boy who had been at the center of all of this. The one who had seen it all. Who had been pulled into the chaos despite his innocence. She looked up at Ellie, the decision already forming in her mind. "Henry," Caroline whispered, more to herself than to Ellie. "He's the one who needs to inherit it all. Not Ryan, not Tina. He deserves it." Ellie nodded, her face unreadable but her eyes shining with approval. "Then you know what to do. He's young, but he's the one who will learn what legacy means from someone who earned it." Caroline's lips trembled into a smile, bitter and full of resolve. "Exactly." Her fingers shook as she opened the envelope, the sharp edge of the paper cutting through the air. Inside, she found a single piece of paper, the final clause of her husband's will. Her hands moved with purpose as she unfolded it and read the words that would seal Henry's future. The legal language was simple enough, but it carried the weight of a legacy passed down through generations. Caroline's eyes locked on the signature at the bottom, Henry Monroe, sole heir. "Sign it," Ellie said softly, but Caroline could see the pride in her eyes. The respect for the decision Caroline was about to make. It wasn't just about the wealth, it was about something far more important. Caroline didn't hesitate. She signed her name in firm strokes, knowing what this meant for Henry. He would learn what it took to build something real, something earned, something that didn't come from lies, deceit, or manipulation. He would grow up with the lessons she had learned the hard way, and when he inherited this legacy, he would carry it with integrity and honor. She slid the document back to Ellie, who nodded her approval. "You've broken the cycle, Caroline," Ellie said, her voice low but filled with meaning. "You've broken the cycle of greed, of betrayal, of everything Ryan and Tina represented. Henry will be the one who rebuilds, the one who carries it forward." Caroline exhaled slowly, letting the finality of her decision wash over her. She had spent so much time fighting, so much time reclaiming what was hers. But this was a new beginning, a future where she was no longer bound by the mistakes of the past, a future where her family would be free from the rot that had poisoned it. The legacy was hers to pass on, and Caroline Munro was finally at peace with the weight of that responsibility. Her heart swelled with a quiet pride as she walked out of the courthouse, Ellie by her side, and Henry waiting for her at home. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over. And this time, Caroline was ready to face whatever came next. "Not yet," she whispered under her breath, a smile creeping across her face. "It's only just begun." The world, once so eager to see her broken, was about to learn that Caroline Munro had just rewritten the rules, and no one, not even the people who had tried to take everything from her, could stand in her way. The ribbon lay across the grand entrance of the Munro estate, its red fabric shimmering in the early morning light. The day was finally here. Caroline stood in front of the building, her heart beating steadily, a quiet sense of accomplishment rising in her chest. The house, once the site of so much pain, now stood as a symbol of something entirely different. A place of refuge, of purpose. Caroline had transformed it from the crumbling remnants of a broken family legacy into the Munro Foundation for Financial Integrity. She had turned betrayal into strength, fear into resilience. And now, as she stood before the grand doors of the foundation, she could feel the weight of everything she had fought for. This was no longer just about regaining control over her life. This was about creating something that could change others' futures for the better. Behind her, the large banner welcoming the first event of the foundation's opening ceremony flapped lightly in the breeze. The steps Caroline had taken, every legal document, every strategy, had all been leading to this. A fresh start, not just for her, but for every woman who had been silenced by financial abuse, by the kind of manipulation that Ryan and Tina had used against her. She wasn't just taking her life back. She was opening doors for others to walk through, to rebuild, to stand strong. Henry, standing beside her, tugged gently on her sleeve. "Grandma, can I cut the ribbon with you?" Caroline smiled down at him, her heart full. It had been months since the day she had taken him in, and through everything, Henry had remained the quiet anchor to her resolve. He had seen the worst of it, the betrayal, the turmoil, but now, here he was, standing beside her, ready to be a part of the new beginning. She crouched down to his level, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Of course, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "This is for you too." Together, they held the large ceremonial scissors, and Caroline's hand guided his as they snipped the ribbon. The crowd of invited guests and supporters cheered, the sound of their applause filling the air with the promise of new possibilities. The foundation had begun, and so had the next chapter of Caroline's life. Ellie, standing nearby, beamed with pride. She had been the one to help Caroline navigate the tangled web of legalities, the mountains of paperwork. Together, they had turned the pain of betrayal into something productive, something meaningful. Caroline caught her gaze across the crowd, and Ellie gave her a subtle nod. Caroline knew that their work was far from over, but today, it was enough. Today was a celebration of how far she had come, and a reminder that no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back up. "Look at you," Ellie said, walking over to Caroline as the applause died down. "You've made purpose out of betrayal." Caroline's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. She reached for Ellie's hand, squeezing it lightly. "That's how you survive. You build on ashes." The words felt heavy with meaning. For so long, Caroline had felt like the ashes, the remnants of something that had once been beautiful, a family destroyed by greed and selfishness. But now, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Her vision was clear. The foundation wasn't just about money or success, it was about empowerment. It was about teaching women to fight back against those who would try to take advantage of them, to protect themselves, legally and financially, to ensure that no one would ever be left outside again. Grandma! Henry's voice cut through the crowd, and Caroline turned to see him running toward her, his face bright with excitement. Can I help with the first workshop? I want to be a part of it. Caroline laughed softly, her heart swelling with warmth at his enthusiasm. She reached out, pulling him into a tight hug. Of course you can, kiddo. This is your future too. Together, they walked inside the building, the first steps into a world of new opportunities, of knowledge, of resilience. Henry was already helping with the setup, his small hands busy arranging materials for the first financial literacy session. Caroline could feel a renewed sense of purpose in her chest as she looked around at the rooms, each one designed to help others build the skills they needed to protect their futures. This wasn't just about reclaiming her family's name or her property. It was about creating a legacy that would outlive her, something tangible that would help women, like her, find their way back from the ashes of their own lives. She and Ellie had done it. They had built this foundation from the ground up. And though Caroline knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she also knew that she was finally on the right path. As she stood in the center of the room, Henry by her side, the foundations of the Monroe family legacy now felt solid, real. The curse that had haunted her family for generations, greed, betrayal, selfishness, was broken. The weight that had once threatened to crush her was now nothing more than a memory. Mom, I'm proud of you, Ellie whispered beside her, watching Henry excitedly prepare for his first workshop. You did it. Caroline smiled, her eyes fixed on Henry as he worked with enthusiasm. No, she said, her voice quiet but strong. We did it. And for the first time in a long while, Caroline allowed herself to feel at peace. She had survived. She had rebuilt. And now the future was hers and Henry's. Together, they would forge a new legacy, a legacy of integrity, a legacy of strength. The family curse was broken. The Monroe estate loomed ahead as Caroline drove down the familiar street, the early evening sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The house sat there, towering against the backdrop of a sky that was turning a brilliant orange, as if the world itself was watching the final moments of this chapter in her life. Caroline's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but there was no tension in her body. Her heart was calm, her mind clear. For so long, this place had been a symbol of everything she had lost: family, trust, love, security. But now it was just a house that no longer had any claim over her. She pulled into the driveway for the last time, her car coming to a soft stop. The lawn, once meticulously manicured and full of life, was now barren, the grass yellowing from neglect. The front door that had once been a threshold of comfort now stood in quiet stillness, a symbol of the chaos that had transpired here. She didn't need to walk inside. She had already reclaimed what was hers. But this visit, this one last moment, was necessary. It was time to finally let go. She stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under her heels as she made her way to the porch. The house stood empty, silent. But she could almost hear the echoes of laughter that had filled it once upon a time, memories long faded, buried under the weight of betrayal. Caroline stood at the front door, staring at the old key in her hand, the key that had once opened every room, every door, every secret of this place. Now it was just a piece of metal, irrelevant to the life she had built since. She dropped it into her pocket, knowing she would never need it again. She walked around the side of the house, her footsteps slow, deliberate, as if each one marked the end of something irreversible. The backyard. once full of life, of family gatherings, of joy, was now overgrown with weeds. But even in its decay, Caroline could see the potential, the possibility. She could see how much more could be built, how much better it could be. As she turned back to face the house, a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, the air crisp with the changing seasons. Her reflection in the window caught her eye, and for a moment, she stopped. Her face, calm, composed, unafraid, stared back at her from the glass. The woman who had stood on this porch months ago, broken, abandoned, was no longer the same. She had rebuilt, reclaimed, and remade her world. Caroline smiled to herself, whispering the words that had been waiting on her lips for so long. You can't be abandoned if you own the ground they walk on. The words felt true now. This land, this house, it no longer defined her. She had the power, the strength, and the legacy. The ground was hers. And with that, she could walk away, knowing she would never be the one left outside again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. Caroline glanced at the screen. It was a text from Henry. Love you, Grandma. See you soon. Her heart warmed, the weight in her chest shifting. She tucked the phone back into her pocket and stood there for a moment longer, staring at the house, the once prison now freed from its hold over her. She turned on her heel, walking back to the car with a renewed sense of peace. The sun dipped lower in the sky as she slid into the driver's seat, the engine purring to life under her fingertips. As she drove away, the house began to fade in the rearview mirror, the once familiar silhouette growing smaller with every passing moment. The world ahead was wide open. The future, hers to shape. The house, her old home, was just that. A house. No longer a symbol of pain or loss. It was a place where memories lived, but Caroline had outgrown it. She had broken the cycle. She had taken everything back. And just as she drove further away, the last trace of that life fading into the distance, one final thought crossed her mind. They left me outside, but they never realized I was the one who locked the gate. With that, Caroline Monroe pressed on the gas and drove toward her new life, the horizon ahead wide and full of possibility. The past was behind her. The future was hers to build.